gradually controls are taking over a lot of the things that operators used to do. And I'll self-adjusting combines as an example, the end of row turns on tractors and planters.
Welcome to the Crop Science Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Arnell. Today, I'm really honored to have Dr. Scott Shearer on with us for this podcast. Dr. Shearer received his PhD from Ohio State in 1986, was at Kentucky for a while, and is currently the professor and chair of food agriculture biological engineering at the OSU. His highlights of his career include development of methodologies and controls for metering and spatial applying crop products and product production inputs. Also, the modeling of agricultural field machinery systems, autonomous vehicle field production systems, strategies of deployment of UAS, and agriculture analysis of production ag data sets. I've known Dr. Shearer for my entire career, and I've considered myself lucky every time I get to sit down and visit because I'm always learning something. So, Dr. Shearer, welcome to the podcast. And if you won't take a moment to kind of tell the audience, how you ended up where you're at and what you do today.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. And by the way, it goes both ways. I've enjoyed my association over the years with you, and I'm glad that I have somebody to keep me grounded in this area of agronomics and crop production. So thank you for that, soil fertility. I'm an agricultural engineer by training. Grew up in the state of Ohio. My love of agriculture came from working on a fruit and vegetable farm that was pretty close to the city that I grew up in. The owner of the farm was an agricultural engineer, and that's how I learned about agricultural engineering at Ohio State. Got to Ohio State, it was pretty comfortable here, stayed for all 3 degrees, and then took that first job at the University of Kentucky. I've always been a machinery person, a lot of my graduate work in mechanical engineering, but I've always been fascinated by automation. Got started with a farmer in Kentucky, in precision ag, probably 1994, put the first yield monitor on a combine. And that's kind of, I'm going to say, ignited my passion for where I'm at today and my focus. All things automation, looking at AI and how AI is going to be deployed in agriculture. And I thoroughly enjoy the opportunities that I get to work with manufacturers and obviously a lot of talented graduate students and undergraduate students over the years.
I mean, I've already talked to Fulton recently, and so right now, to me, Ohio State is tough to beat as far as an engineering program. You guys are really loaded with talent up there, so I'm quite jealous. Not that we're slouches here at Oklahoma, but you guys got a great applied crew, which is always refreshing to see when it comes to that. So jumping into what you're doing, most of our conversations the last couple of years have centered around automation. So let's not look forward. Let's look at, what has been happening in the world of automation on the farm in the last 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. And Brian, I'm glad that you mentioned the time frame there. Obviously, we've seen increasingly companies coming out with features on tractors that are really removing a lot of the drudgery of control of field machinery from the operators. Obviously, we have auto steer, but end of row turn technology. I'm going to say over the last several years, the operator of the tractor or combines really become more of a babysitter, if that makes sense. They're there when things go wrong. And I think that's been kind of unique because kind of creeping up in the background is gradually controls are taking over a lot of the things that operators used to do. And I'll self-adjusting combines as an example, the end of row turns on tractors and planters. I look at all the technology on planters today and think to myself, how has it changed or how has it altered the equipment operators need to get off the machine and check and see what's going on from time to time as they plant. So it's made farmers better, all these technologies. I think there's a lot more uniformity in seeding technologies, getting the seeds placed at a certain depth. We look at firming the seed bed around the seed. There's just a tremendous amount of technology that can be brought to bear on a lot of those, I'm going to say traditionally problematic type areas that maybe farmers didn't pay enough attention to. Combine adjustments have changed markedly. I think we see a lot cleaner grain samples. We see a lot less grain on the ground as a result of this. So, fun time to be a farmer.
I love that you went in the direction I was hoping you would, where, you talk to farmers and you say automation, and I think they picture the robots first, right? Instead of thinking about, in theory, we had the whoever's running the planter tractor was getting off every so often, at least twice a day. We'd like to have seen it more often, but as soil conditions and field change. And I hadn't even thought about that with the automation, the precision plant, some of that technology. We have to stop less often because we know by row what seed's going down. So I like you bringing up the automation isn't just the machine's running itself, but we're collecting and knowing information as we go that is taken away. And that is automation in itself.
Yeah, and Brian, one of the other comments I'll make about this too is, if we go back to the days of the Dickie John planter monitors with the light bulbs that flickered on and off. Today, when you see a row unit performing at about 98% singulation, the farmer stops the tractor and gets off and goes back there to figure out what's going on. Why isn't that 99.9%? Whereas we go back into the 1970s maybe, and everybody was happy with, 80% singulation in some cases.
Those finger planters, finger pickups, if you got to 80, 85, we still run some of those in research. So I know the challenge of getting good singulation on a 2-row John Deere finger pickup.
So, it's changed the way people look at some of the operations. And again, I'll remind you, you go back in time, you found your planting mistakes after it was too late to do anything about it. Today, it's in real time that you're learning about those sort of things.
So let's put it this way. If you step back to where you were, let's say it's 2023, around 2015, 2016, is there anything that hit the marketplace that was either more developed and advanced than you expected or had a bigger impact? I don't know if that question makes sense, but something that if you look back, you would have said, this came out further or is further along than I thought it would be.
The thing I think that really captured my attention back in the mid-teens was what precision planting did for planting operations. I'm looking at if a farmer buys the full suite or the full complement of technologies. Precision planting, I thought, was the company was kind of unique in that they really redefined planting quality, if you will. Mm-hmm. Singulation accuracy. A lot of the terminology coming out of the Seed Sense 2020 monitor has really driven a lot of the other companies to do similar things. One of the things that I've always been a bit confused by is why aren't we seeing the same type of approach applied to sprayers?
Yeah.
In terms of quality of spray application. And so we're starting to see some evidence of that coming now. But really, I think it was that startup business out of Central Illinois that kind of changed the way, at least in North America, we viewed planting operations. And so I think they were ahead of uptake in terms of release of new products. Like everything else, some things work well in some locations, not so well in other locations. But generally, I think that a lot of people look at planting today much differently than they did maybe back in the year 2000 or 2010 because of some of those developments that we saw coming out of precision planting. Certainly other companies were coming along with things too, but I remember variable rate seeding being the big sea change in some respects. And mm-hmm. I think variable rate seeding might pale a little bit in comparison to some of the technologies we've seen come out for planters recently.
Well, if you had told me back then that farmers would be readily and willing to pay what they pay for row unit now, I would have laughed. But it's pretty impressive what it takes to put a full row unit together anymore.
Well, and a comment on high-speed planting. I know planting speed is limited by the ground conditions, but also there was a bit of a sea change there, and that all of a sudden you weren't constrained to 5.5 miles an hour. Now all of a sudden 6, 7, 8, 9 miles an hour, it's okay. It works well. And again, it doesn't really make any difference whose high-speed planting technology you pick. We've done some things at Ohio State up to about 17 or 18 miles an hour, and really we saw a little discernible difference in yields planting at those speeds. I don't recommend that people plant at 18 miles an hour, okay? But the technology works, and what I keep telling farmers is we prove that it works at above 15 miles an hour, so you ought to feel comfortable at 7, 8, or 9.
So that's actually, it's funny you said that, because we, part of another podcast, I had Taylor on and a couple of others the other day, and we're talking about speed of sprayers. Somebody in the class said they like to run their sprayer 25 miles an hour. And so we're talking, it's like, what is a legitimate speed of high speed? Just because we or you as university says, these planters will hit 15's probably not a ride that we want to take on most ag fields at 15 miles an hour.
Two things I'll say: you need to plant more border passes, and the other thing is you better be wearing your seatbelt. Okay?
Absolutely.
I don't recommend planting at 15 miles an hour. I think that's absurd. However, I think farmers, if they purchase the technology, should feel comfortable at 7 or 8 miles an hour easily. Again, local field conditions are going to dictate rocks, things like that, undulating terrain. But probably some of the cheapest planter capacity that's ever been produced, bar none.
Well, I think it's interesting is the same thing we say on the fertility side. If I go back to what Dr. Soley and Dr. Stone did on the variable rate application, we were the engineers and the agronomists, Dr. Ron, were able to get fertility down to a sub-meter resolution. And even, the sprayers that those guys put together were under 6 inches and they could hit it well. It doesn't mean we need it on every sprayer. That's what we have to do. But the point was, we have the science and machinery to do it, which should make you feel more confident once you scale up, or in your case, slow down, that, hey, this is the potential. So that means the area you're operating in is good.
Yeah. And, I looked at variable rate application and really kind of when it all got started was back in the mid 1990s. And I'm kind of amazed today because we start talking, at least in the state of Ohio, about some of the challenges we have with water quality issues. And we're just seeing some of the federal and state agencies come around to, well, that variable rate application, that might be a good thing. Maybe we should be doing that. And I'm kind of amazed the duration and length of time it kind of took people to get around to that way of thinking in some respects. And I know it varies, and again, you got to be careful because variable rate application is really well suited when you have a lot of variability. When you're uniformly low or uniformly high, it really doesn't return too much to you in the way of benefits or profits. So
no, and when I talk to my classes, Scott, I'll tell them, it's like, the engineers were there 20 years ago. Agronomy, not even just agronomy, but agronomy, and some of the conversations we have, and John and I have, is that we don't even know how to do the agronomy at that resolution. It was never meant to be that small scale. Agronomy and soil science was built on watershed, on county, and giving it to field level. So we're still learning the agronomic sciences, and I'll be coming to Fulton in the near future, and some of our folks here with potential sensor requests because of the work that I'm doing, because I know we don't have the technology to measure what I think we need to measure to do the variable rate application right.
And Brian, along those lines, the gold standard is still pulling a soil core and sending it off to a lab. And as much promise as a lot of people wanted you to believe in terms of our ability to sense on the go, we're still not there yet. There's been a lot of good products come to the marketplace, but there's nothing that universally beats that soil test that we send to a lab.
And I want to say, of all our inputs, on the go fertility will never really go because of the mental task it takes, because of the social aspects of fertility. On the go IPM, that's fine. If it's a weed, spray the weed. But with fertility, For decades, we have been telling farmers, you can't manage the water, you can't manage the pest hardly, but by golly, you can make sure the fertility is in place so that if the rain, the wind, and the sun hits right, you max. And now social economic issues, now we're saying, well, you know what, maybe we weren't wrong, but they're bred into the mindset of that's a risk management. And now we're saying, okay, you got to do something that's a perceived risk. That throws the whole thing out the window.
Yeah, no, and I understand. I get that. Things are continuing to evolve, and it's people being creative and thinking about ways to utilize technology to achieve an end goal, and so I get that. And historically, I think we had a lot of engineers that fancied themselves soil fertility experts, and we might have had a lot of soil fertility experts that fancied themselves engineers.
Absolutely. Without a doubt, if you don't have the groups on the same campus that communicate, because we do have some campuses that may not communicate well, if there was no communication, then that one group thought to lift themselves up. So we've talked past and current. So tell us what you see as the next 10 years, 15 years of automation in agriculture.
Well, I'll tell you some of the things we're working on at Ohio State, and I want to be careful here. Please don't construe anything that I'm saying as an endorsement of a product, but rather think about, I'm talking about classes of products.
Yeah.
And so in that spirit, in that light, we're really enamored with some of the automation packages that have entered the marketplace. And Brian, I know you talked to John and Randy here recently, but we were at Agritechnica, and one of the things that I was kind of really blew me away in some respects was most of the major manufacturers had some sort of concept or product offering in the way of autonomy in their booths. And I got to go back and count them up, but I got to about 35 different autonomous tractor/robot offerings, either conceptual vehicles that have been put together or things that are being marketed currently at Agritechnica. And, we have good examples here in the U.S. and, the John Deere 8R autonomous tractor. I know that there's a number of those out on test this year. As an example, we have Sabanto that's dropping automation packages on Fendt tractors and Kubota tractors. Our experience has been with a Sabanto automation package on a Kubota M5 tractor, and we've had it with a batwing mower on it. We've had it with a tillage tool on it. I know this may sound inappropriate in some respects, but I'm really getting to the point where I have a lot of confidence in that tractor's ability to operate with little human intervention. Now, I want to caution everybody at this point in time. We still have the human operator while they're not on the tractor. They're still monitoring the progress of the machine in the field. But the technology just kind of bowls me over the fact that we've gotten to this point. And I think the gap that really got closed here recently was some form or fashion or ability to sense and monitor and protect against collisions in the field. And really, when you look at the John Deere tractor or to a certain extent the Sabanto automation package, it's a collision avoidance that allowed us to go from where we had been with an operator on the machine to the operator being remote. Now, everything's not all necessarily roses, so to speak, because we need wireless connectivity of these machines. And one of the things you might guess in rural parts of this country, we struggle with internet connectivity, especially for mobile machines.
It doesn't have to be rural anymore. On the avoidance, what are they using a sonar technology? What are they using commonly for avoidance on these larger machines?
So as this automation evolves, and we can talk about different levels of automation. For passenger cars or vehicles, we talk about level 0 through level 5 autonomy. You get to level 5, no human intervention is needed. No human monitoring is needed. In agriculture, we're about level 3 right now. There's still an operator in the loop, okay? The technologies that are enabling us to go from level 3 to hopefully level 5 is actually artificial intelligence applied to a vision system. Okay. And if you look at John Deere's 8R, 8RX autonomous tractor, that are actually using multiple stereo vision systems that have been trained, in my understanding, at least news accounts, they're using about 40 million images to form the intelligence for collision avoidance. But my understanding is, in part, that training, you got to kind of anticipate all possible situations. I listened to a person talking about risk mitigation for autonomous vehicles when I was in Germany, and he made some rather amazing statements to me. We have automated taxi cabs in San Francisco, okay? And this guy was saying that for automated cars, the environment is very well known. Okay, it's a paved road. There's stripes, lanes. You got crosswalks that are identifiable. You got street signs that govern the local laws. Agriculture doesn't have any of that. And what crop are you in? What's the previous crop? What's the shape and size of the field? Are you crossing a waterway? Is it a tree in the way? And the point being is, and this guy was very good at making this point, this gentleman that was speaking, agriculture is a very difficult environment to develop artificial intelligence for. Okay?
It is diversity. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so anyways, and he drove the point home. He said in agriculture, how often you have to be right with AI. And somebody in the audience said 99.9% of the time. And he said, so, okay, I got a large fruit and vegetable operation. I employ 1,000 workers. And what you're telling me is it's okay to run over a human every month. And so it's all perspective on risk management. And we have to think carefully through that as we move towards autonomy. It is occurring. It is real. It is going to change the way we do agriculture. There's no question in my mind.
All right, I'm going to move this, and you didn't list this on the things I could ask you about, but I want to ask you about it anyways, because I always ask you about these things when it comes to your other work. Got into the conversation with John about the size of equipment. So this is going to be two-parter, all right? So he mentioned with the move, I mean, we're getting 200, 300, 400 horse tractors. The addition of the track is becoming more prevalent. Just in layman's term, if I put a track on a 400 horsepower tractor, what does that do compaction wise? Is that the same as a 200 horse without tracks, or are we going down to 50 horse because tracks are that amazing?
I'll start with a couple things. I don't know whether John covered any of this, but one of the things I always encourage people to do is look at the owner's manual for tractors, wheeled versus track tractors. Generally, on a wheeled tractor, we're going to see recommendations ranging from 120 up to 135 pounds per engine horsepower. For track tractors, they'll back that down a bit. Okay, it's not universal necessarily, but we're starting to see some recommendations in the 110, 115 pounds per engine horsepower. So, to get the engine power to the ground, depending upon the traction device, you have to have ballasted tractor mass. If you got a 500 horse tractor and you've only ballasted it for 300 horse, transmit to the ground, obviously that's going to be your limitation on what you can do. What you're going to do is get an excessive tractor wheel slip. Having said that, I want to get people thinking about there's two types of compactions. There's surface compaction, there's deep compaction. Deep compaction is driven by axle load. Okay. Shallow compaction is driven by contact pressure. My concern, and you got to be careful here because a lot of people say because you put tracks on a vehicle, I got 5 to 6 psi contact pressure that I've taken care of my compaction problem. Well, I don't think that that's an accurate statement. Okay. And what concerns me greatly is what we have 3,000 bushel grain carts now.
Oh, yeah.
We got tractors in the marketplace over 700 horse. But if you've been watching things on social media here recently, one of the major manufacturers probably has a tractor coming in the marketplace that will probably top out somewhere around 1,000 horse. Okay? And I want to remind you, you got to ballast the tractor if you're going to use it in a tillage application. Okay. So, having said all that, the higher the gross vehicle weight, in my estimation, my professional opinion, the deeper you're going to drive soil compaction into the ground. Okay. And that's irregardless of wheels or tracks. Now, will tracks help mitigate some of that? Certainly. There's no question about that. But I don't want people to fall into erroneous thinking about just because I have tracks on my machine, I no longer have compaction problems. The other statement I'm going to make, and I hope you can appreciate this, tracks will get farmers in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
What I mean is they will go to the field and perform field operations because they can, not necessarily because they should. And what I'm really talking about is wet fields at harvest. Okay. Now, look, I get it. The grain sits in the field, you lose yield for a variety of reasons, and you want to get in there and get it out. But the other thing is those tracks will give us mobility probably at the wrong time to be in the field too.
All right. Well, it's like, I'll joke. It's like the Texas students that are in Oklahoma and Kansas the first time it ice is over and they have 4-wheel drive. So they think they have 4-wheel drive, so they're confident to go out on the ice. They've never seen the ice a day in their lives. And so that's just immediate. We see more 4-wheel drive pickups in the ditch on our first ice event on a college campus. And you could probably appreciate that when you're in Kentucky at the same point. But
yeah, I'm reminded, this is several years ago, we were collaborating with a farmer, and we had a track combine, we had a track tractor, and a track grain cart. And the farmer said, I don't care what you do, get that grain out of the field. And the grain cart operator on the radio was telling the combine operator when the water got up over the fan on the cleaning shoe. And that's when you had to stop. But, hey, I get why people are going to do certain things. I will say that tracks, when you have poor ground conditions, certainly provides substantial advantage. Yeah. And, we're probably doing a lot less in the way of damage to fields by not rutting them up near as badly. But I also want to be careful because they're going to be on soils, close to field capacity, where compaction effects are going to be the most pronounced from those gross vehicle weights.
As we speed up, whether tracked or wheeled, on the engineering side, do we expect to see more slippage or less slippage as our speed goes from 5 to 8? I know it's a field condition. The researcher would say, I can't tell you because you don't tell me the field condition, but let's just give a general.
Yeah, and I'm going to say generally as we speed up, and part of it depends upon the draft application. You got to be careful there. My guess is we're probably going to see less slippage. Okay, but again, it all has to do with the draft load and how that tractor is ballasted. So you got to be very careful. Generally, if we're running higher speeds, we're probably going to see lower draft loads, if that makes sense. And in part, there's this trade-off between speed and implement width, if you will. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
I had a conversation recently with a tillage tool manufacturer, and I said, are you ready for 1,000-horse tractors? And they replied, I don't think we have tillage tools wide enough. And I said, well, if farmers can't get wider tillage tools, what are they going to do? And they said, well, they're going to pull them faster. And I said, well, okay, are your frames going to hold up to higher speeds? And it got pretty quiet at that point in time. So anyways, there's a lot of challenges. We see the high-speed disc coming out. We see vertical till tools. And again, those ground speeds on tillage, if anything, have gone up over the last several years. So, well,
Randy Taylor was talking about somebody he visited with, probably at Agritech, a spray repair guy who had to take a trip to Australia to find out why booms kept crashing. It's because they were taking corners with a 120-foot boom at 25 kilometers per hour, 30 kilometers per hour, and that just whipped it around, so shattering the carbon booms. Last little question I have. In our time together, we talk often about autonomy, and we've been talking vehicle weight and horsepower. If we move forward into what you would deem as a perfect autonomous system where we're talking swarms of tractors, that's a whole other conversation. What's that tractor size that you're seeing would fit the swarm system? Are we in the 100 to 200 horsepower class? What's that really looking like?
So you kind of hit on one of my favorite topics, and I could probably go on for about 3 or 4 hours on this. But one of my assertions is if we automate, and I think you're correct in that we'll probably have more pieces of equipment, but if we automate and we're able to remove the operator from the environment, and we're able to have that human maybe monitor 4 or 5 tractors, I think they get smaller. Okay. The trend right now is towards bigger equipment. We see bigger combines, bigger tractors. I get that. Farmers want to be more timely. They buy them. They are more timely. They farm more acres. But everything's predicated on a human operator being on the machine. Okay. And yes, I know we have some examples of machines where we remove the operator from the cab and they're monitoring the piece of equipment. But two or three things to kind of get people thinking here. First of all, as equipment gets wider, our field efficiencies go down. Okay? You know, the big 48-row planters, it takes a while to jockey them around when you're turning at the ends. You get into fields with point rows and things like that. It's more complicated. Your field efficiency goes down. Smaller equipment generally has higher field efficiencies. And so that's one factor. Another one to think about is as we go to bigger equipment, and I'm going to use Ohio farmers as an example, they tend to be more spread out because they may not own all the ground in one location. And so they're cash renting, leasing, whatever the case may be. Speaking to a farmer this past summer up in Northwest Ohio, and I said, how far are you spread out north, south, and east-west? He goes, I'm about 33 miles north-south and about 23 miles east-west. And so as we go to bigger tractors, the question is, and this is the valid one, how much time you spend on public thoroughfares going between fields, okay? And so that's a factor I think that we need to consider. The other thing is as we automate, we're going to remove a lot of the parts of components on the tractor that are put on there to support humans. The cab, the air suspension seat, the seat heaters, the seat vibrator, the high-intensity discharge lighting. I mean, all that stuff goes away.
Yeah.
Okay. And that really brings down the cost of the tractor. Now, you're going to argue, well, the automation takes it back up. But one of the other things I'm going to say to you is, in some respects, when I look at what Deere has done with their 8R, they put that stereo vision AI system on there that allowed them to take the operator off the tractor. So there's kind of a marginal cost there. I'm looking right now, if I go out and buy a new high horsepower tractor, okay, and I get all the bells and whistles, I want to be careful. I sat around trying to get one of the manufacturers 4-track tractors. I was trying to get it to $1 million and I couldn't. I spent about an hour and a half, 2 hours doing that. But the takeaway was, once I got all those options on there, it was about $1,560 per engine horsepower. I did the same thing on a Kubota M5 with a ROPS. I maxed it out. Okay, it took me about 20 seconds. And the cost of that was somewhere around $670 or $700 per engine horsepower. So a lot of difference in terms of the iron cost, which I think the Kubota tractor I just related to, represented versus the technology cost. Okay? So I think the iron manufacturers, the traditional machinery companies, and there's pretty good evidence of this, now are beginning to understand that a lot of their profits are going to come from selling technology. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm suggesting iron becomes more of a commodity, whereas technology is what really differentiates some of these products. I think the ultimate tractor size is probably going to be around 100 to 130 horse. I think if you have ground engaging tools, it's going to be either 10 feet or 3 meters in there. I think if you're spraying, it's going to be a multiple of that, 3 times that. And part of it is that tractor can easily be transported on a truck and trailer. You don't need a CDL to move it between fields. When we do get it to the field, it's going to spend a greater percentage of the time in the field actually doing work because it's a smaller tractor. And I think you're right about there's going to be multiples. We're going to be able to run them 24/7, which has some advantages over what's going on today. And that single operator, the person that's probably moving the vehicle between fields, is going to be able to monitor the activities of multiple machines.
The interesting aspect of what you said on the size is what I think. It's also what we work with heavily on the ag experiment side is that, I'm running 4-row planters on 30 inches. I'm running 10-foot drills and I'm running 30-foot sprayers. Why? Because I can move them up and down the interstate and the highway effectively, efficiently with 1-ton pickup and a 3/4 ton if I must. It's not out of realm. I wonder.
I'm going to give you one other thought. And company out of Australia, Swarm Farm, is building autonomous sprayers. Okay, and they've been here in the U.S. and they've been demoing one of their sprayers. The interesting thing, one of the take-home messages, I got to meet with Andrew and Jossie Bate, the owners of the company, but they got out their smartphones. We're sitting in Columbus having lunch, and I said, "How many of these machines you got out in Australia?" And they said, 54. And so I looked at them, and they showed me where all the machines were located on their smartphones. And I said, there's quite a few of these machines that are inactive. And they said, well, they're probably in the bar. Okay, I get that. But then there were a number of the machines that were active. And I said, so there's a bunch of them that are sleeping. What's that mean? He goes, well, it's nighttime in Australia, so they're not working at night. And I said, well, there's like 3 or 4 sprayers over here that are operating. I said, how can that be? You told me it's nighttime. He goes, well, weather conditions are such that they can continue to operate. The wind speed's low, and there's no inversion predicted. I said, so what happens if the wind speed gets up? He goes, we shut them down. And so it got me thinking totally differently about spray application in some respects. That's a bit of a game changer in that you sense the local variables in terms of weather conditions, and you control the sprayer in relationship to that.
Yeah. I mean, I'd fully assume that we basically put on all these, especially the spray models, a small weather station that's getting relative humidity, getting wind speed, getting those parameters for the site-specific nature, not just to say, do I stop, but also to record it so that if something happens liability-wise, we have that to share or not to share, depending on the situation. One last question. I was going to make this really brief. If we talk about planters moving from a 400 horse running 60 feet or 90 foot, whatever, versus a 100, I'm running 4-row units with a 90 horse. So let's just say 100 horse, 4-row unit. Can I get on a field in Ohio any quicker if I run a lighter tractor with smaller row units, or do I still have the same, I have to wait for it to dry out the same equally?
I think you hit one of the nails on the head, so to speak, in that our mobility with a lighter weight tractor is going to be much better. I'm going to go one step further. What happens to our mobility with a lighter weight tractor if we put tracks on it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And, you're back in, the top 2 inches dries out, you're back in planting a lot sooner than you are with a high horsepower tractor, central fill planter, and a lot of the attendant axle loads that come along with that. And so I think there's some value there. I think it's going to take a while, but I think long term, there's probably going to be some soil structure benefits to going to lighter weight vehicles and perhaps even tracks on those.
It's time for our famous 3.
I'd agree. I could sit here all day with you, Scott. So we're going to wrap this up so we can go both get on to our business at hand. A couple just questions that we ask all of our guests. First is, what's your go-to work resource? What do you turn to when you have a question?
Well, you Google everything. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's kind of where it's at. But I'm telling you, one of the things I've been having a lot of fun with is Chat GPT.
Yeah.
And you don't get anything better than what you ask it, okay? And so I want to be very careful about this. If you ask very direct, very pointed, very well thought out questions and ask it to respond, it comes back with some amazing information. The other thing that I've kind of enjoyed here recently too is some of the AI-driven image generators. Sometime, since you're a soil fertility person, jump on there and have it generate a corn plant at 4th or 5th leaf stage with a potassium deficiency and see what you get back. Okay, it's just, I know it sounds kind of odd or whatever, but I think AI is going to change the way a lot of us do our daily work.
Yep. All right. So on a little more personal note, what do you do in your free time if you have any? What's your leisurely activity of choice?
I always tell people my avocation is my vocation. Okay? I love anything agricultural machinery related. If anything, I'm going to be at home playing with my tractor and implements. And I don't live on a farm, but you just got kind of in your blood or whatever. So anything tractor, anything sprayer, combine, whatever it is, if I have an opportunity in my spare time, I'm going to be doing something like that. And it sounds kind of odd, but when your avocation aligns with your vocation, I come to work every day and I have a lot of trouble determining when it's time to go home. So,
Agreed. Finally, so if people want to know more about what you're doing at Ohio State, the Ohio State, if they want to know more about what's going on up there with you and your department, where do they go?
There's 2 or 3 resources. Obviously, hit our webpage. There's I encourage you to do that. I'm going to give a lot of credit to people like John Fulton and Elizabeth Hawkins because of their creation of the publication we know as eFields. And so what we're trying to do as we adopt and begin playing with some of these technologies is try to publish the results of some of these field investigations in eFields. You can get online, download it. It's not a heavy read. A lot of graphics in it. It's really designed to deliver information in a very short period of time. So,
yeah. Fantastic publication.
Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
I share with our ag communication group on an annual basis, saying, "Hey, when can you help us create this?" So, Scott, Dr. Shearer, thank you so much for joining us today on this podcast. I always enjoy visiting with you and hope to get to see you in person soon.
Well, Brian, thank you for your time today. I always enjoy catching up with you as well.